Hello and welcome to Premier Injuries. And today is our first Monday of looking at specialist data to do with the Premier League in terms of injuries. And of course, we do have the injury guru himself, Mr. Ben Dinnery here. But before we get into it, I do have to remind you to like, share and subscribe. It's really easy, and tick that bell there for the notifications because we're coming up with daily content through the week at the moment. But of course, we do have a discussion point of this week on our Monday special show. And today we're actually looking at who is the worst team for Premier League injuries this year. Now, this is a two-pronged argument that Ben is going to talk you through. So yes, Ben, what is the kind of discussion point here? Who's doing bad? Who's doing good? Or can we even say that they're doing bad and good?
Look, there's no black and white simple answer to this. Everybody seems to think that if a team suffers more injuries than another team, then the blame is laid at the doorstep of the medical department, physios, sports science, so on and so forth. That simply isn't the case. So stress that from the very beginning, because when it comes to, say, physios, and we've seen an example of Liverpool head of medical Chris Morgan come out in the press this week and almost defend his stance at the club, receiving a lot of hate through social media. They see their players for a very short period of time. And unless you're talking about a player who is returning to play and the effect and impact on their return to play schedule, then really they don't have anything to do with maybe training player loads on the pitches. Or if you look at players like maybe Virgil van Dijk, Joe Gomez, those big injuries, those are all, just mishaps of playing the game. How can you legislate for a tackle like that from Jordan Pickford, for example? So to lay the blame at the medical department it's really unfair, first and foremost, and it's just wrong. So just to sort of clarify that, again, there are teams that suffer more injuries than others, but it's a culmination of a lot of factors that influence that, and that can be, from the shortened pre-season to load to the fixture congestion. And there's lots of ways to look at this, and also player history. If you talk about maybe players who inherently suffer a lot of injuries, then the chances are they're not going to get any better on season, and that's a fair indication that they will be suffering injuries going ahead. And yes, I am rambling here, but Leicester have obviously been in the news this weekend, suffered a few high-profile problems just within the last week or so. First of all, we've seen James Maddison. We've now lost Harvey Barnes to a knee injury, which is going to require surgery on Tuesday, and that could potentially put him out for at least 6 weeks. There have also been problems with Johnny Evans and also Jamie Vardy. You go on top of that with the likes of maybe Pereira, who just came back, Fofana, who's still currently sidelined, James Justin, ACL injury, and it's clear to see, how that first team's been affected. And that, when you look at the media outlets and some of the headlines are being published, it's easy to get caught up in this hyperbole about, who's suffering the worst and who's having. But the reality of the situation, yes, Leicester have suffered quite a few injuries to key players in key areas, you cannot dispute, but they haven't suffered the most this season by far.
Yes, so let's look at these actual data breakdowns here, Ben, because this is the kind of thing that we want to give to the audience. So statistically speaking, who are the kind of top teams for significant time lost, total days lost, and also kind of a number of injuries? So can you talk us through the teams and again, maybe reasons for this?
So there's different ways of looking at the data and interpreting. For this specific study that we collected, we're looking at the number of what we class as significant time loss injuries. So those which result in a player being out for at least 10 days. And these are reported from the opening weekend of the season. So from game week 1, and that's up to including Monday night as the team news had announced prior for the Everton and Southampton game. So it really is current and it is hot off the press. And tonight, those figures, showed it's one of those ones where I have to do a double take, and I had to run it again because, unfortunately for Burnley and Sean Dyche, they have suffered more individual injuries than any other top flight side to date. They've had 37 significant players sidelined. However, in terms of time loss, we're only looking at 670 days. And I say only to help quantify that. You're talking, best part of a year and 3/4 lost to injury over this short period of time within the season. However, in the grand scheme of things, it really is only slightly above the average for the Premier League, which is 575 days. Elsewhere in that sort of the upper echelons of injuries reported and illness, we have Newcastle, which won't come as much of a surprise to many people. But again, in terms of days lost, it's 760 days. So it is fairly high, but it certainly isn't as big as say, for example, somebody at Liverpool who come third on that list. They've suffered 34 injuries, but the key factor for them is they've lost over 1,000 days to injury. And that's, again, that shouldn't come as any real surprise when you're talking about some of those big injuries, particularly from the beginning of the season. And also what we need to consider is that doesn't include the likes of maybe in Oxlade-Chamberlain, who was injured, coming into the campaign. So we haven't even included that injury or those days lost either.
So a final question to you, Ben. Looking there, as you said, the average kind of time lost is around 575 total days in the Premier League, coming up to game week 26. Is this average over the last few seasons, or should we contextualize this that for every team, this is harder than most years?
Start of the season, I mean, Project Restart in itself, everybody had concerns about, the Premier League kicking off and even the Bundesliga to that extent, players being sidelined for so long. And yes, of course, they were able to maintain base levels of fitness, but they weren't able to do any, sport-specific work. There's no actual sort of way of replicating what happens on the training pitches, those highly charged testosterone environments, that competition. You just don't get that from training at home on a treadmill or, doing whatever. So people were expecting, once Project Restart kicked off, to get a high number of soft tissue, maybe muscle injuries. Didn't transpire. And in the Bundesliga, they actually seen a little bit of a drop. But what we did see coming into the new season, given the quick turnaround, we're talking some teams, particularly those who were involved in the latter stages of European competition, less than maybe a week to prepare the players properly from rested. And we did see a spike in incidents, during those first sort of 4 to 6 weeks. And it was quite a dramatic increase in and around maybe 22, 23% on year-on-year averages for the last 5 years. However, as we approach Christmas and certainly come into January, where historically, again, we see this big spike in the number of injuries, and that's due in part to that congested Christmas festive program. And we actually seen a little bit of a downturn, and that brought the figures more in line. We were talking about maybe just an 8 or 9% increase in year on year, so they come right down. However, and this is the caveat, it was a bit of a false dawn in actual fact when we looked at the data from the 1st of February, and when again we seen a sudden spike in the number of injuries. And we've discussed this on previous videos before when I was talking to the fantasy doc himself, Raj Brar, and he was explaining the concept as, if you could imagine you have a bucket of water, you place it under a tap, and you have the water dripping in this bucket, and for a period of time that's absolutely fine. There's no impact, there's no effect on that. But what it is, it's an accumulation of water, and it gets to the point where all of a sudden it overflows. And that's like this accumulation of fatigue. So what we're seeing now is players who have been used and utilized without, maybe adequate rest and preparation, and they're just breaking down. So within this last month, we've seen huge numbers of incidents, and a real spike. And yeah, look, I'm expecting that to continue from now and through, unfortunately through until the end of the season.
So just to thank you, Ben, for your time today. Of course, we are here for the community, and keep an eye on Ben's Twitter feed, because we'll keep you up to date with what kind of content we've got coming up in the week ahead. And the good thing is it's going to be content curtailed around what you want. So keep your eyes peeled for that, because we've got some exciting revelations coming over the next few days. But yes, thanks for tuning in. And remember once again to like, share and subscribe. And we will see you next Monday for the next Premier League injuries data update.